Welcome to Flashpoint, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. It's Auto Show week, so we are revving up the rundown with our automotive experts, Glenn Stevens, Joanne Muller, and Sam Abul-Samad. I also caught up with Governor Gretchen Whitmer at the Auto Show, and Richard Czuba is here to break down some latest poll numbers in all of the big races. A January 18th edition of Flashpoint starts right now. It's been a busy week here in Metro Detroit, highlighted by the president's visit, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. You've probably heard Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's name this week for several reasons, and not all good. As the Detroit News' Beth LeBlanc reported this week, 4 black employees at the Secretary of State filed a discrimination lawsuit against their boss, Benson, and the department, alleging a racially hostile environment. Benson's office responded, calling the allegations absolutely false, and they will vigorously defend that lawsuit in court. Benson also got an interesting endorsement for governor this week from Reverend Horace Sheffield, the father of new Detroit Mayor Mary Sheffield. That's interesting because Sheffield's pivotal endorsement in her mayoral run was from then Mayor Mike Duggan, the same Mike Duggan now running against Benson. So far, Mayor Sheffield has not endorsed anyone for governor. In You Know What Really Grinds My Gears news, longtime Flashpoint guest Adolph Mongo fired off a pointed op-ed in Deadline Detroit this week. He took direct aim at the state Democratic Party for what he perceives as Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist being forced out of the governor's race. He blamed former Senator Debbie Stabenow for not stepping down early to allow the governor to appoint someone, possibly Gilchrist. He then went a step further, calling on Mallory McMorrow to drop out of the Senate race, citing the hypocrisy of party leaders to push one candidate out, but not another, who appear to be in similar positions. Speaking of the Senate, Senator Alyssa Slotkin saying this week she's now being investigated by federal prosecutors because of that video she made with other lawmakers. Those Democrats, all former military or intelligence officials, urged military members not to follow illegal orders. Slotkin, a former CIA officer, is the second lawmaker now from that video to face federal scrutiny. 6 months after declaring his bill to ban cell phones in schools dead, well, State Rep Mark Tisdale's efforts have brought it back to life. On Wednesday, the House passed that bill, and this time the Republican got his Democratic colleagues to come along. This would ban smartphones during instructional times, which many other states have already done. The governor expected to sign that if and when it hits her desk. Now to the president's visit to Metro Detroit. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, it was overshadowed by this exchange with a Ford worker during his tour of the Rouge plant in Dearborn. As an employee yelled "pedophile protector" at him, the president mouthed the F word and flipped him the middle finger. If you'd like to read the responses from Ford, the White House, and find out about that employee's work status, we broke it all down at clickondetroit.com. But let's focus on the automotive part of this week with our panel coming up right now. It's Auto Show week, so why not talk about the industry with our auto experts? The executive director from Mish Auto, Glenn Stevens, is with us. Sam Abul-Samad is the VP of Market Research with Telemetry, and Joanne Muller is the transportation correspondent with Axios. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Let's start here. Glenn, I'll start with you. The president here this week talking about tariffs, the way he's not been shy about saying tariffs are working, tariffs are great. The governor taking a different tack, which we're going to hear later in this program, that tariffs are awful for the Michigan automakers right now. Does it fall somewhere in the middle?
Somewhere in the middle. Since January 20th of last year, the America First Trade Policy Act, we've been going through a lot. No question that costs have increased. Consumers haven't felt it yet, but the industry has, and they've absorbed that for the most part. We have a lot to shake out still, particularly with USMCA.
Sam, what do you think? Plus, it doesn't seem like the CEOs of the companies are all that upset right now.
So far, they've been able to manage things. After an initial flurry of tariffs, there was a bit of pullback with anything that was USMCA compliant being given a break and being cut from some of the tariffs. But there's still additional costs for the industry, and they've been pushing towards more premium models and also hiding some of the cost increases, especially through things like destination charges, which, for example, on full-size trucks have gone from $1995 a year ago to $2,600 now. And that's, if you go in, dive in deep, you'll see that across most vehicles, the destination charges have gone up by about $400 to $600 over the last year.
Joanne?
Well, Sam is right. What's happening is people with money are willing to pay that much for a truck. They don't mind the $2,600 charge because they're already paying $80,000 for a pickup truck. What's very interesting, though, I think, you asked about what the car makers think about this. The tariffs have been offset by other changes, regulatory changes that have really helped them a lot. And basically, they have carte blanche now to sell as many gasoline-powered vehicles as they want, and that means more profit. And so they're not complaining as much about the tariffs.
And from the outside, you might think that when the goalposts kind of keep changing, a huge corporation can't just pivot like that, but you're saying the goalposts are working in their favor at the moment.
On balance, yes, exactly.
For the moment.
For the moment, yeah. But where do we stand on EVs? Who wants to jump in here when we talk? Because you kind of alluded to it. They've been given the carte blanche to go all gas now, or as much as they want. But EVs seem to have been falling by the wayside.
Yeah, so end of September, we lost the federal EV tax credits.
Right.
And that had already been, in a lot of ways, scaled back significantly because of the IRA anyway. So it made it tougher for import vehicles to claim those. But in Q4, we did see the expected fall off in EV sales because there was also a pull ahead of sales in September in the third quarter as people rushed to claim the tax credits on a bunch of EVs. We will probably continue to see some slackening of EV sales for the next quarter or two, but I think as we get towards the second half of the year, we're going to start to see some pickup again in EV sales because we're starting to get more affordable EVs coming to market. The new Nissan Leaf is out there now for under $30,000 for 300 miles of range. The new Chevy Bolt's coming out towards the end of the year, beginning of next year. Ford's launching their universal EV platform. So you're going to see more affordable EVs in the marketplace, which to people that want an EV but couldn't manage it before without the tax credits, now they've got some options.
I think it was kind of shocking to see the Lightning stop production, and maybe it was just too expensive. Glenn, let me bring you in here and ask about the competition right now. I think a lot of people watching that China-Canada kind of what's happening with those two countries right now.
Well, it's fluid. There are so many dynamics going on right now. We talk a lot about China. There's no question that it's here. It's spreading around the world, and it's not just the scale, it's the speed of innovation. Jim Farley talks about that a lot. But what we just saw in the last 24 hours is an agreement between Canada and China to lower tariffs on EVs. So now we will not only see EVs in Mexico, we will see EVs start to proliferate from China in Canada. And we were talking earlier, the question is there an assembly plant behind that? Could be. Very, very big development.
It doesn't feel like it's good news for the Detroit automakers.
It's going to be tough because now you've got multiple challenges. You've got the U.S. automakers increasingly building vehicles that certainly outside of North America that nobody wants. They don't want big V8 powered pickup trucks. You're never going to sell F-150s in Japan. But you've also got the other countries, our traditional trading partners like Canada and Mexico, being turned off by U.S. policies, and especially Canada with the talk of Canada becoming the 51st state. A lot of Canadians don't want to buy American products anymore. So the U.S. market is getting increasingly isolated, and if they've got other options, they're probably going to go for them.
Joanne, let me ask you this, and everybody react to this. This was a quote from September in Automotive News, but making long-term product decisions in the murkiness of today's climate requires mapping out multiple scenarios. We're kind of touching on it here, but how do you think the big three have done that, mapping out multiple scenarios?
Well, I think they've done relatively well because they have no choice, right? But when you have these gigantic policy swings, this whiplash, there's a lot of money wasted, right? And so you just saw GM and Ford both have enormous write-offs. $19.5 billion, I believe, at Ford. GM was $6 and more to come. That is wasted investment, right? So we need some consistency in policy. But our country is very divided, and our policies are divided. And so the automakers are doing the best they can. But if you look back at General Motors as an example, 5 years ago, GM said it was going to have, I forget the number now.
Well, targeting 50% EVs by 2030.
Yeah, 50% EVs by 2030, and they're nowhere near that.
Yeah.
Here's the key, and Joanne touched on that, and a quote another Ford executive, Bill Ford, said this week, political lead times are a lot shorter than our lead times. And these switches and these moves on policy, on regulation, which we're dealing with right now, I mean, what we saw transpire with trade, with CAFE, with fuel economy, EV incentive, all in the course of 12 months, you have to be prepared for that. But having a change in the next administration, and that goes on a state level too.
Yep.
That's very difficult
A lot of
for
changing.
these companies.
Less than a minute. Let me get a quick prediction from each of you. Your biggest concern, or maybe a prediction for the next 5 years. Glenn, go right down the table.
That we're not taking a short view. We have to take a long view. And this market is global still. The competition's global, and Michigan has to have a long view. And all our companies do, but we as a state and policymakers have to.
Sam?
I think one area that we're going to start to see a lot of growth in the next few years is in automated driving. We've seen a lot of automakers announce plans for hands-off, eyes-off, level 3 systems coming in 2028. So that's going to be a big change as well.
Last 10 seconds, Joanne.
I think affordability is the issue for the foreseeable future. Watch the used car market. It's going to become very important.
All right. Always appreciate your time and your insight. Thanks so much, guys. We're right back. We're going to talk more autos with the governor right after this. Back here on Flashpoint with Governor Gretchen Whitmer at the auto show here, and you've been here all day kind of soaking it in. What would you say is your biggest concern with the auto industry in Michigan right now?
I think tariffs. You know, we know that the capricious tariff policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C. are having a disproportionate impact on the auto industry, manufacturing writ large. You know, we've seen 9 months of contraction. And so I think it's really important that we continue to make sure we've got the skills and the incentives, and that this is the place where the auto industry calls home. But at the federal level, we need help out of D.C. to have a real strategy going into the USMCA.
And we know the president does like to say that tariffs are working or helping. When you look at where EVs are going as we stand in front of a fully electric Cadillac Escalade, what do you hear from the Michigan automakers when it comes to being pushed and maybe pulled by politics when it comes to where the future of EVs are headed?
Well, it's a terrible way for business to have to figure out how to operate. If a change in administration means a complete change in all the investments that they've made that are decades-long investments, you know, how can you make money doing that? How can you be an ongoing, you know, competitive, thriving industry that employs so many people? So I think that whiplash is really hard. We got to get the politics out of it. We should make sure that our industry can compete on all fronts, whether it is internal combustion engines or it is EVs. We have to do all of the above, and we got to do them better than China. And right now, it's really hard because of policies coming out of Washington, D.C.
How concerning is also affordability when it comes to new cars? The average monthly price is getting closer to $1,000, which seems obscene.
Well, listen, you know, when we talk about tariffs, it hits affordability from the blueberries that you're buying that are coming from Mexico to all the items that we buy that come from overseas to the vehicles. That parts go back and forth over the border, you know, multiple times just for one vehicle. And so we're paying a tax every time that goes to the consumer. It prices a lot of us out of the market. And so that's a part of this bigger question too, is how do we save costs for the American person? And it's by having a real strategy, a good strategy, not a capricious one.
Yeah. Let me ask you about some news of the week. I see the lieutenant governor behind you. He switched course, dropping out of the governor's race. Did he ask for your counsel? Did you counsel him on that decision?
I am never going to talk to you about conversations between me and my lieutenant governor, but he's right there if you want to talk to him.
Do you think that's a smart move on his to switch to the Secretary of State race?
You know what? I'm staying out of all the primaries. We got a lot of great Democrats running for a lot of different offices, and I've just decided I stay focused running the state of Michigan. He's been a great partner to me. He's a wonderful lieutenant governor, and like I said, he's standing right behind me, so you should talk to him.
We'll try that. The other thing, we see what's happening in Minneapolis right now. Again, another shooting with ICE agents involved. What is your assessment of how ICE agents are enforcing immigration law across the land right now?
Listen, I'm talking regularly with our leaders at all levels and law enforcement at the municipal level. I'm talking with Mayor Sheffield. We're working very closely together, trying to keep the heat down here in Michigan because we see how dangerous it is when it gets out of control. People have a right to peacefully protest. I support that 100%. I just want to keep Michiganders safe. That's the most important question on my mind. And I hate to see what's happened. It breaks my heart to see how I think an abuse of power is endangering Americans' lives, and I worry about that.
And it seems to have worked. Obviously, he ran through some places he was worried about. Hasn't mentioned Michigan, but is that a plan, maybe a contingency plan when you think about our population, our air population in Dearborn, that this could happen in Michigan?
I hope it doesn't, and we're going to continue to work to keep the temperature low and lines of communication open and keep people safe in Michigan. But I think anyone who's watching the news and see what's happening should be concerned, and with good reason. That could happen in any American city. If that's how they operate, I think we should all be upset about it, and we're going to continue to do what we can in Michigan to keep it from happening here.
Governor, always appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
Well, you heard the phrase, ask him yourself in there in regard to the Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist. So I did just that, and here's his answer on jumping from one race to another.
This came upon reflection with my family and my closest friends, my friends who were with me before I was in politics, people I actually care about. And what I thought about is the conversations I've had with Michiganders all over the state who care about not only making things more affordable, but making sure that we can actually vote for people who can make things more affordable. And so upon that reflection and thinking about when I first entered into public life, which was to try to be the Detroit City Clerk and election administrator, that's something that was never far from my heart. So I figured that this was now the opportunity to serve in a position that matters, that can help Michiganders across the state, that can make systems work for people, and that's why I made this choice.
My thanks to the governor and lieutenant governor for that. We are going to break down some of the latest poll numbers coming up right after this. Back here on Flashpoint with pollster Richard Czuba, the CEO of Glengarriff Group, and a new poll that you conducted this week for us in the Detroit News Drop this week, Richard, with some fascinating numbers. Start with the governor's race, which is really shaping up to be unlike anything we've ever seen here in Michigan.
Well, the top line on the governor's race is we've got a toss-up, and it may turn out to be a toss-up between three candidates instead of two. We have John James leading 33-8, Jocelyn Benson 32-2, Mike Duggan 26. And we've never seen an independent candidate in our history with this much support going into a governor's race.
What has surprised you more of these numbers? Is it the motivation between Republicans and Democrats, the difference there, or is it Mike Duggan's name ID has suddenly risen to the top of the ranks in outstate Michigan?
Well, first of all, Republicans appear to have, going into this election year, a motivation problem. One of the questions we ask is, are you definitely voting or probably voting? Our running joke is that if you tell us you're probably voting, you're probably not voting. So we have about 75% of voters saying they're definitely voting. Amongst base Democrats, those strong Democrats, it's 88%. Amongst base Republicans, we saw it at 72%. Big difference in motivation. Now that can change. I just want to stress that. But right now, Democrats are far more motivated to vote. Mike Duggan, we look at these polls and we look for systematic gains from poll to poll. And what we've seen from May to January is Mike Duggan is the only candidate who's changing his numbers. And by that, I mean, first of all, he's gained 5 points in the head-to-head. He's gone from 21 to 26. The other candidates are stagnant. But more importantly, back in May, only 31% of voters in outstate Michigan knew who Mike Duggan was. He's increased those numbers by 25%. And as a result, that's where he's picked up the 5 points. Mike Duggan is now making himself known to outstate, and it appears that he's getting some traction and voters are listening out there.
That's really incredible. And the big news this week was that the Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, exited the race. His voters, do they automatically go to Jocelyn Benson, or what do you think?
Well, we don't know. We haven't done a head-to-head with Garland Gilchrist necessarily in that governor's race. I think his voters are a lot of base Democratic voters. He had a much lower name ID. It was good, but it was much lower. And frankly, I think that shift for him to the Secretary of State's race is one of the smarter political moves I've seen in the past couple of years.
Let me talk about the Senate race, which we know it'll be Mike Rogers for the Republicans, but he definitely has some work to do here. And I believe it's largely with those independent voters, isn't it?
Well, it is. And what we see here is this is shaping up to be an absolutely classic U.S. Senate race in Michigan. We don't have the craziness we see of a three-way race in the governor's race. This is a head-to-head between Republicans and Democrats. Mike Rogers comes in with 72% name ID, good, solid name ID coming off of his last run. Then we have the three Democrats. We have Abdul El-Sayed at 49%, but his name ID is already underwater. More people view him unfavorably than favorably. Number two is Haley Stevens at 41%, and she has positive name ID. And then Mallory McMorrow comes in at only 24% name ID so far. So when we look at these races, what we see is that amongst all likely voters, those who are definite and probable, we see Rogers leading Abdul El-Sayed by 6 points. He's leading Mallory McMorrow. But then when you get to Haley Stevens, it is a dead even race. And the difference is that against El-Sayed and McMorrow, Rogers is leading by 15 points amongst independent voters. But amongst Haley Stevens, the independents are dead even. They are tied. She brings some kind of magic to Southeast Michigan independents.
Less than a minute. I just want to ask you, it being a midterm, obviously Mike Rogers doesn't have Trump on the ticket this time. Is that his biggest challenge?
Well, he couldn't win with Donald Trump on the ticket. He came and he lost it in counties like Oakland, Genesee, and Bay, where he ran behind Trump. The decision makers in this U.S. Senate race are going to be Duggan voters. That's what gets really interesting because Duggan voters are going +8 for Rogers over Abdul El-Sayed, +7 over Mallory McMorrow, but they go +3 for Haley Stevens over Mike Rogers. They are going to decide this U.S. Senate race.
Wow, that is interesting to say the least. All right, Richard Czuba of Glenn Gariff Group, always appreciate your time and your work to get those poll numbers. Thank you, sir. That's going to do it for Flashpoint this week, everybody. Thanks. Meet the Press coming up next.